Picture this. A quiet afternoon in a small town takes an unexpected turn when an ordinary citizen finds themselves face to face with law enforcement. The tension rises when a simple interaction quickly spirals into a battle of rights and authority. It all begins with a routine stop, but as the conversation unfolds, it becomes clear that not everyone is on the same page about the rules they're supposed to follow, especially those who wear the badge. In today's video, we explore a real-life encounter where female officers confront someone refusing to show ID. What starts as a straightforward request reveals cracks in their understanding of the law. This isn't just about paperwork or protocol. It's a deeper dive into the balance between individual rights and police responsibility. Why did the officers insist on ID? Did they truly know the legal boundaries? And what happens when someone stands firm, calmly challenging the system? As the conversation grows more intense, you'll be left wondering, who's really in the right? Stay tuned to see how it all unfolds. And remember, knowing your rights isn't just important, it's powerful. This is more than a story. It's a reminder that knowledge can be your greatest tool. The scene takes place on a sunny street corner, with just enough activity around to make it seem like any other day. Our main character, a calm and collected individual, was out minding their business when two officers approached. At first, it seemed like a routine encounter, polite questions and casual conversation. But things took a turn when they asked for ID. The request was simple, yet the response caught the officers off guard. "Am I being detained?" came the measured reply, sparking a moment of silence. It was clear the person knew their rights, but the officers didn't seem entirely sure how to respond. One of them hesitated, glancing at her partner for support. The other officer, trying to sound confident, insisted on compliance. The tension began to build. Why were they asking for ID in the first place? Was there a legitimate reason, or were they operating on assumptions? Meanwhile, a few bystanders started to take notice, their quiet curiosity adding to the growing sense of unease. Without raising his voice or losing composure, the individual stood firm, asking for clarification. The officers, however, seemed to grow more flustered. And just like that, a simple interaction became something far more complicated. The air felt heavier now, the kind of tension that made even passers-by slow their steps. The officers stood their ground, repeating their demand for ID. But the individual wasn't backing down either. Calm but firm, they asked again, "What's your reasonable suspicion? What law have I broken?" The question hung in the air, and for a moment, it seemed like neither officer had a clear answer. One of the officers, clearly irritated, tried a different approach. "We're just doing our job," she said, her tone sharper now. But was she? That was the question lingering in the mind of anyone watching. If they couldn't explain their authority, was it still justified? The other officer, less vocal but equally uneasy, glanced around as if searching for a way out of the standoff. Meanwhile, the crowd had grown. A few people pulled out their phones, recording the scene. The officers noticed, and their body language shifted, less certain, more defensive. Were they worried about being wrong, or were they doubling down on their position out of pride? Every moment stretched longer than the last. The individual's steady demeanor seemed to unnerve the officers more than any loud protest ever could. But the question remained, how far would this go? The energy on the street was now electric, a mix of curiosity, tension, and anticipation. The officers, clearly feeling the pressure, tried to assert control. "You're obstructing an investigation," one of them declared, her voice rising just enough to catch the attention of those still passing by. But the individual remained steadfast. "What investigation?" they asked, their tone measured but unyielding. "I have the right to know why you're stopping me." The crowd grew thicker, with murmurs rippling through as more people stopped to watch. Phones were out, capturing every word, every gesture. The officers exchanged glances, their frustration mounting. They weren't used to this, a situation where their authority was questioned so directly, so calmly. One of them stepped closer, her expression hardening as she repeated her demand. But instead of intimidating, it only fueled the tension further. The individual didn't back away, standing firm but keeping their distance. "The law is clear," they said, locking eyes with the officer. "If I'm not being detained or suspected of a crime, I don't have to show ID." It was a battle of wills now, and the crowd could feel it. Everyone was waiting, holding their breath, wondering who would make the next move, and what it would be. Just when it seemed like the tension had reached its peak, a voice cut through the air. "Is there a problem here?" A man in plain clothes stepped forward from the edge of the crowd. He looked calm, but his presence immediately shifted the energy. The officers turned to face him, their expressions flickering between annoyance and uncertainty. The man held up a badge. He was off-duty law enforcement. "I've been watching for a while," he said, his tone even but firm. "This person has the right to refuse unless you have probable cause." The crowd murmured in surprise, the dynamic now shifting again. The officers, clearly caught off guard, didn't respond right away. The off-duty officer continued, addressing both his uniformed colleagues and the growing audience. "We all have a responsibility to follow the law, even us," he said. His words carried weight, adding an unexpected layer to the conflict. But instead of de-escalating, the tension climbed higher. The female officer who had been leading the interaction bristled. "We're just trying to do our job," she said sharply, her voice edged with defensiveness. The off-duty officer raised an eyebrow. "Then do it right," he replied. Suddenly, the focus wasn't just on the individual anymore. It was on the officers themselves. What would they do next? Would they stand down or double down? The crowd, phone still recording, waited for the answer. The silence was deafening, the tension so thick it felt like the entire street was holding its breath. The female officer hesitated, her confidence visibly shaken by the off-duty officer's intervention. For a moment, it seemed like she might concede. But then, in a surprising move, she stepped back and spoke quietly into her radio. Moments later, another patrol car pulled up, its lights flashing but siren off. A senior officer emerged, his expression serious but composed. He approached the scene, his eyes scanning the crowd, the two officers, and finally the individual at the center of it all. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice calm but authoritative. The female officer quickly tried to explain, framing the situation as a refusal to cooperate. But the senior officer held up a hand, cutting her off. "Did you have reasonable suspicion or probable cause to stop them?" he asked directly. The hesitation in her response spoke volumes. Turning to the individual, the senior officer nodded respectfully. "You're free to go," he said firmly, diffusing the situation in an instant. Relief swept through the crowd, but just as the individual turned to leave, the unexpected twist came. The off-duty officer approached the senior officer and quietly handed him something, a recording device. "You might want to review this," he said. The senior officer's face tightened as he realized the entire encounter, including the officer's questionable actions, had been captured. As the crowd dispersed, the tension lingered, leaving everyone to wonder what repercussions might follow. The story may have ended for now, but the questions it raised would echo far beyond that sunny street corner. As the crowd dispersed and the flashing lights faded into the background, the weight of what had just happened lingered in the air. The individual, calm and composed as ever, walked away without a word, their quiet resolve speaking volumes. It wasn't just a personal victory. It was a powerful reminder of the importance of knowing and standing up for your rights. The officers, meanwhile, were left with more than just the uncomfortable stares of bystanders. The senior officer took the recording device and returned to his car, his expression unreadable but thoughtful. It was clear that this incident wasn't over, not for the department, not for the officers involved, and certainly not for the individual whose confidence had turned a routine stop into a moment of accountability. For those who had stopped to watch, there was an unspoken understanding. This was about more than just showing ID. It was about responsibility, authority, and the fine line between the two. As the street returned to its usual rhythm, a lesson remained. Standing up for what's right, even in the face of pressure, can create ripples far beyond the moment. And for everyone who witnessed it, this wasn't just an encounter. It was a story they wouldn't forget.